Can you go straight from the fridge to the pan? And what's really in a bone? Here are tips that professional chefs know when it comes to making the perfect steak. If you've ever had an issue with your steak cooking unevenly, the culprit might have been the temperature. Steak removed from the fridge and placed directly on the heat is harder to warm up than steak that sits at room temperature for up to an hour before cooking starts. The wait is worth it. Once you get a good burn going on the steak, the results come closer to the steak you get at a steakhouse. Juicy and evenly done, all the way through. If you're concerned about leaving raw meat out for that long before cooking, this should make you feel more at ease. Trichinosis, a raw meat-related foodborne illness brought on by a microscopic parasite, is extremely rare in these instances. In the cases where this does happen, the parasite comes most often from pork or wild game. The only exception that some restaurant chefs make to the don't cook straight out of the fridge rule is if they've dry brined the meat ahead of time. Dry brining makes meat cook more quickly, taking away one of the issues caused by cooking cold steak. However, if all of this talk of brining takes you out of cooking steak 101 and into the realm of the complicated, it's perfectly okay to just start with room temperature steak and see how much better the meat cooks. While it certainly doesn't hurt to start your steak with a quality cut of meat, the only way to take it to the professional level is with plenty of butter. Many home cooks avoid cooking with large amounts of butter because of its high fat content. But as the late great chef Anthony Bourdain explains in his article, "Don't Eat Before Reading This," there's no avoiding butter if you want to make restaurant-level dishes. Writing, "In almost every restaurant worth patronizing, meat and fish are seared with a mixture of butter and oil. Cooking steaks in a bath of butter along with a bit of garlic, rosemary, and thyme is what makes restaurant steaks so succulent."
It is usually the first thing and the last thing in just about every pan.
Really?
Yeah, that's why restaurant food tastes better than home food a lot of the times. Butter.
Another important ingredient is salt. Seasoning thoroughly is a crucial step when cooking any meat, and a good coating of salt is perfect for enhancing steak's savory, rich flavors. Most chefs recommend applying a generous coating of salt to the meat 45 minutes before you start cooking. It might go without saying, but juicy steak requires plenty of juices. If you turn your meat over by stabbing it with a fork or knife when you're cooking at home, you're just letting those juices escape. Restaurant cooks use tongs, not allowing those juices to escape to freedom at the bottom of the pan. So what's the trick for flipping your steak the restaurant way? Most steak aficionados recommend just one flip. Allow the steak to cook for a few minutes on one side, depending on thickness. Then flip it once to cook on the other side, using tongs, of course. The rationale behind this is that if you cook it for long enough on each side, the steak will eventually be cooked evenly throughout. The Maillard reaction is the chemical reaction that gives steak a nice brown crust. It requires high heat and moisture in order to caramelize the proteins and sugars of a food. Salting your steak in advance allows the salt to pull out the steak's juices, which then mix with the salt to form a brine. Tossing a well-salted steak into a very hot pan induces the Maillard reaction and can create the perfect sear. Because this requires a temperature over 300 degrees Fahrenheit, it's best to use a cast iron pan that can handle the heat. Restaurant kitchens are stocked with equipment intended to deal with extreme heat. This chain reaction creates flavors and scents that didn't exist before the chemistry experiment got started. It's not something that an uncooked steak produces on its own. It's not just steak that benefits from the Maillard reaction. If you've ever taken a healthy bite of the hot crust of freshly baked bread, or a chewy and crunchy chocolate chip cookie, or enjoyed an exceptionally fine roast of coffee, you've experienced this reaction firsthand. It's even one reason why your roasted veggies taste so good. The foods that best produce this reaction include dairy, eggs, seeds, and nuts. It's also worth noting that the Maillard reaction tastes different for every food because of the unique blend of sugars and proteins each contains. Elements like salt and butter set off the Maillard reaction, but a deficit of moisture also happens to be among the things required to start it off too. Too much moisture in the steak causes steam to rise from within, curbing the reaction. Restaurant chefs deal with this in a simple way. They pat the extra moisture off the meat before applying the seasonings. You can easily do this at home with paper towels. That ribeye or T-bone that you love so much comes with some built-in insulation, the bone. Because of the bone in the middle, the cooking time on your steak can be extended, which is something that your average chef understands. The meat surrounding the bone cooks at a slower pace than the meat on the outer edges. To accommodate this difference, your favorite steak restaurant cooks the bone-in steak on the grill. This allows for more even cooking while still leaving behind the fat next to the bone, one of the most flavorful parts of the steak. Some people erroneously believe that the bone itself creates a steak with more flavor than its boneless counterpart, but this isn't the case. The flavor that people associate with the bone, like you'd find in a bone broth, comes from the connective tissues and the bones being cracked open to release the flavor. This doesn't happen with bone-in steak, where the bones remain uncracked. Oven cooking also works, particularly if you combine a good searing from the grill with a finishing touch in the oven. The result is a steak that has a crisp and savory outer coating that encases the steak's tender interior. Anthony Bourdain also insisted that a steak needs to just hang out for a little while before being served. No slicing into it, no poking, and no prodding. This advice might seem counterintuitive, but a lot goes on under the surface while the steak just hangs out. What you can't see when the steak is cooling is that it's still cooking inside.
Don't overcook it. Overcook it's no good. It defeats its own purpose.
That red center goes from red to pleasantly pink. The juices disperse themselves throughout the steak, ensuring that once you finally do cut into the steak, you'll taste them in every bite. If you're trying to replicate Chef Bourdain's techniques at home, here's a good rule of thumb. Let the steak sit for 5 to 10 minutes on the cutting board before slicing it up or serving it.